It's a great honor for me to be able to inaugurate the proceedings of this conference. This is a sign of the universal perspective of an organization which has begun essentially from a Christian background to ask a person who is a Muslim from across the waters and the lands east to share with you a number of issues which are crucial not only for Europe and America, not only for the Western world, but for the whole world at large. And that is the spiritual crisis of modern man, which has led us to such an impasse that even the question of the family, which was taken to be the most normal and natural unit of human society from the Stone Age onward, has now to be discussed, as if we were to discuss how to breathe the air or how to drink water. But the problem is so profound and so severe that even the most elemental aspects of human life, which have nourished us until now, have now to be re-examined. We cannot take anything for granted, because the type of man who rebelled against heaven some centuries back, the type of man whom I define as modern man, in contrast to the contemporary man. By man, of course, I mean man and woman, who live in this world but who have not rebelled against the fundamental principles of life. This type of man has now forced us into a situation in which what was once most normal, natural, and taken for granted has to be fought for and sought, like the fresh air which we used to breathe so easily, but now we have to fight for in order to survive. Let me say a word at the beginning, that the destinies of the West and the Islamic world are intertwined in this as in every other question. For many a century, the Islamic world was the West's only other civilization, the only other which the West knew. And it was as a result of the interaction between the two that both civilizations grew. In a period when there is so much misunderstanding and enmity, I think nothing is more important than bear upon those points which in fact unite those in the West who have faith in God and the Muslims who live in fact in this faith. And especially when it comes to the question of the family, which itself is rooted in the question of the crisis of man vis-a-vis himself, vis-a-vis his society, vis-a-vis the world of nature, and of course most of all vis-a-vis God, the creator of all of these realms. Now, before modern times, before man put himself in a position in which everything was questioned, he lived in the certitude that there was a reality beyond the physical world which surrounded him. He lived for that reality. He spent all of his life in such a way that the material conditions of life around him did not really determine what he was going to do and how he was going to live his life. There was always a world beyond. And therefore, the passions of the soul were checked by the certitude of a greater world which surrounds this and which commences at the moment of death. This certitude having been lost, in a sense, the earth and all of the material things which we seek became for most human beings the only end, the only thing to be sought. And as a result of this, a crisis has come about where even two spouses have difficulty earning a living to be able to bring up a family. The crisis which now is sought to be solved on the social level is, however, much more profound than the external trimmings and the question of social engineering by which many seek to redeem the maladies which are too manifest not to be seen by all, either skeptic or believer alike. there is a very deep spiritual malaise, a crisis in the modern world, which manifests itself, first of all, in the sense of the loss of meaning. Meaning is lost. Meaning in the ultimate sense is lost. And meaning is ultimately God. God is meaning. To have lost God is to have lost meaning. And the loss of meaning is always intertwined with the loss of the sacred. The sense of the sacred, which normal human beings always carry within themselves, as if one were carrying a relic, an icon in the Christian context. Traditional man always felt that the sacred was with him. This sense of the sacred is lost. It is one of the parameters of the normal experience of human life, which unfortunately has disappeared in the experience, day-to-day experience of many people who live in the modern world. And with the loss of the sacred has come the loss of the unity of life, the unity of the various aspects of human existence, the unity which once related religion, family, society, science, philosophy, theology, art, all together. The unity in which, in fact, not only Islam, which is based on unity, but Christian civilization, when the whole of Western Europe was Christian, breathed in, morning in and evening out, during many, many centuries of its existence. Since that unity is now lost, all of the institutions which were based on a divine injunction and which related to the sacred have either fallen apart or have been segmented and separated. There are several institutions in society today which are not the inventions of the modern world. They were there before the rebellion of man against heaven. They were there from the tradition, the past, which is primarily Christian, of the West. First of all, of course, the church. The church is not an invention of the modern world. Secondly, certain forms of rule, such as that of kingship, which were not invented by the modern world, the monarchy. Thirdly, the institution of revelation, which is the foundation of the church itself and the harbinger of truth. And fourthly, the family. The family is now the modern invention. And like all of those other institutions, it therefore is in the middle of a battleground where it has to fight for its survival. In the earlier phases of the rebellion against tradition in the West, and later on in the rest of the world, in the East as well, the rebellion began essentially with an attack against the main institution, which was that of religion itself. The atheists and agnostics of the last 2-3 centuries never thought that the family was also one of the institutions to be targeted. But little did they realize that in fact the structure of the family is meaningless, theologically, religiously, and psychologically, unless there is an element that transcends the purely biological union between male and female and the social conveniences of living together as a unit. That bond gradually having loosened. Unfortunately, this last of the divinely ordained institution in society, which is the family, is now being threatened like all of the others, like the church, like monarchy, like the whole idea of revelation and all that descends from it. And as a result, we now have a crisis where the loss of this unity is causing the various aspects and domains of human life to have become segmented and separated. There is, first of all, now, for most human beings who face this crisis, a separation of man from God, from ultimate meaning, from that which would bestow a degree of absoluteness to certain human activities, which would allow human beings to bear through pain, sorrow, difficulty, and sacrifice with something beyond the immediate gratification of the senses, or the passions and the psychological drive which human beings have. The result of this alienation from God, from His teachings, is the alienation from nature. Nature is God's creation. It is not ours. We have not created it. And by this nature, I mean not only the trees and the meadows and the sky and the earth. I also mean the nature within us, our body, our biological system, which in fact is not our own. We have not made it. And that is why in both Christianity and Islam, suicide is a very great sin. And why you have in, for example, the Divine Comedy of Dante, the example of those who take their own life being in the inferno. And in Islam, likewise, it is said that when a person takes his life or her life, he will remain in the worst infernal state until the moment of his natural death, when God willed him to die, would come about. So we have also a nature within ourselves, a nature which manifests itself not only in the way we eat, not only in the way we walk, but of course also in procreativity, how we propagate the species, and therefore the question of sexuality, the question of the family, the question of all that relates us in one way or another to the biological world around us. Nature has become desacralized. It has become a machine, unfortunately, as a result of the transformations which took place in the 16th and 17th century in the domain of science, and before that theologically and philosophically in the West. Therefore, the idea that there is something sacrosanct about nature ceased to be of any consequence, except the know-how for many centuries did not allow this mutilation of the sacred sense of nature to have any effect upon the microcosm, upon us as human beings. It was the factories, it was the womb of the earth, the mines that were reaped and plundered as they have been, and of course the whole complex